All right, we're in this newer series called Book Club. Pastor Ron started us off a few weeks ago in the book of Hosea, and I think it was, Pastor Ron, I think it was one of the best messages you ever preached at Vima. It was so good, and I just think, man, you're a gift to our church. I appreciate you, Ron, and he's a gift to our church because he leads youth, he leads small groups, he gives me some time off, lets me be able to have vacations and things like that, but then he's leading our group hold on, I'll let you all apply just a second. You jump-started this, give me a second. But he's leading our group to Peru, so I'm grateful for that too. And so Ron is a great leader in our church, and I'm thankful for him. You guys give him a hand. I think it's great. The idea about this series, me and Pastor Ron were talking about some stuff to do in the summer, and we thought, hey, we got some books that we love, some books that we've read that we wanted to share with the church, and we thought about doing like basically a summarizing message on some popular books that we've read that we'd love for you to read. And then as we started talking about it, we're like, that's all cool and everything, but we actually have a really great book right here that we carry with us to church every Sunday. What if we forgot the other authors, and what if we just went to God's Word and looked at some books in their entirety and looked at their themes, and we did our book series that way. And so we kind of shifted this series, and we decided, let's just stick in God's Word. In fact, it's better than any other author anyways, don't you agree? And so what we're doing is we're kind of taking some shorter books in the Bible that have one or maybe two powerful central themes, and we're going to share those with you. And here's our goal, is that at the end of each of these weeks, you could open up that book of the Bible, read through it that week, and all of a sudden the words would have more meaning to you. We'll give you a little bit of context, a little bit of culture, a little bit of a deep dive into it. But our goal is that not that you would read other books, but our goal is that you'd pick this book up and read it some this summer. And so today we're in the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is an Old Testament prophet, and he wrote this book. It's just 3 chapters long. It's really simple, but there's really kind of a central theme that I think is so pertinent and personal to maybe so many of us, because this is kind of the question and the theme, the questions that Habakkuk kind of goes over in his book. What do we do when God doesn't do what we want him to do? When we want him to do it, or how we want him to do it? What's the proper response to God when things in my life, excuse my French, suck? There's just not a better word for it. When things aren't good, when things don't go how you wish they would go, what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to talk to God? What does my life look like when things are not going the way I hoped they would? How do we keep going in our faith journey when it doesn't seem like there's any hope? And this is a book of faith. It's a book of the journey of faith in God that starts with some doubt and complaining and ends with some trust and some worship. And so I really do believe that the book of Habakkuk is actually a gift to us, not because he answers all the questions that we have. It's not a book of like where he says, hey, if you want God to do what you want him to do these 3 things, and he's like a genie in a bottle, he'll do what you say or what you want him to do. It's not a book like that. I believe the reason this book is a gift to us because it gives us a real and authentic approach to how to ask God questions, to how to suffer, to how to lament, to how to have pain, to insight into prayers and insight into conversations between God and a man. And the book of Habakkuk is unique because it is just a conversation between God and Habakkuk. There's no other audiences that are mentioned. Most of the prophetic books in the Old Testament are a prophet speaking on behalf of a people to God, getting a message from God, and then giving it back to a people group. But in the book of Habakkuk, we have something unique. It's just a message between the prophet and God. Just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is, a lot of scholars, a lot of theologians believe that the reason that it's portrayed this way is because in this era of the history of God's chosen people, the Israelites, there were very, 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 very few who were remaining faithful. In fact, Habakkuk may have been one of the only men staying faithful to the teachings of God. And so there was no report for him to give to anyone because no one was actually looking to hear from the Lord. In fact, in Habakkuk, we actually see that the people of God are evil and they're worshiping other gods, and there's all this brokenness inside of them. And then there's also the same things are happening in the world outside of them. And it's almost as if Habakkuk is one man in the middle of a mess crying out to God. In fact, some of us, we might feel that way today. I'm one person in the middle of my mess, and I'm just crying out to God. There's things all around me. There's enemies around me. There's things aren't going how I want, but I'm crying out to God. And so we get this beautiful book, this beautiful conversation from Habakkuk. We'll start right at the beginning, Habakkuk chapter 1. So he says this, the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. This is, in your translation, it may say oracle, or it may say prophecy. So the prophecy or the oracle, the vision at which the prophet Habakkuk saw. But I think this word in this New King James Version means a lot more to me than just a prophecy or a oracle. Because you got to see that there's a weight to what Habakkuk saw. There's a weight to what he was carrying. In fact, if you keep reading to Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, he talks about this weight. And he talks about it being like a rot that's setting into his bones. In fact, it's something that he expresses as not just an emotional weight, it's a physical weight. Have you ever gone through something that was so heavy or so frustrating or so maybe so disconcerting, so it lacked so much clarity and you were so anxious that it wasn't just something you thought, it wasn't just something you felt, but it's actually something that affected you physically? I've gone through that a couple times in my life. In fact, in my faith journey, even in planting this church, God called me and my wife with faith to step out and plant this church. We moved here in July of 2019. We launched Vima Church in January of 2020. And then 6 weeks later, this little thing called COVID happened and shut churches down all across the world. And all of a sudden, what I felt like God called us to in faith, I was full of anxiety, full of worry. Like, how does this little church that just started, we don't know anybody, how is this thing going to survive? And I'm telling you, it wasn't just a feeling, it was a feeling. It was a burden. And so Habakkuk, right out of the gates, in very first verse, we get this sense that what he's seeing is he's not just telling us, here's what's going on in the world. There's a weight to it. And then the next verse, you start to get to see this unpack. Verse 2, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you, violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds." Look at the words Habakkuk is using right here. He says iniquity, trouble, plundering, violence, strife, contention, powerless law, wicked surrounding, perverted justice. I think it's safe to say that things weren't good for Habakkuk. Things weren't good for the entire people group of God, the people of God, the Israelites. Things were not good. They were not how they wanted them. They were not how God wanted them. Yet this was an accurate depiction of their current state of life. And yet it wasn't good. I think sometimes as believers, we think that life should just always be good. But as we start to see the life of Habakkuk, we see even though he was a good, faithful man in a time and an era where not very many were, his life was surrounded by a bunch of negative things. And maybe this is how you find yourself today. Things aren't good. It's not how I want them. Maybe you feel helpless. Maybe you feel like the enemy is winning, like evil people are surrounding, like nothing ever goes right. And if that's the case, this is going to be a great message for you. Because we're going to see how Habakkuk responds to this. How does this prophet of God, how does he respond when he's surrounded by evil, brokenness, helplessness, one man standing alone? And then he goes on to say in verse 12, he goes on to talk a little bit more about this, but I want to back up just one verse and show you this. I love the question he asked. He goes, God, do you not hear me? God, I'm crying out to you. I'm pleading with you. I'm lamenting. I'm going before you, God, and I'm expressing myself and my emotions and my thought in the current state of things. I'm being very real with you. Do you not hear me? And then he goes on in verse 12. He says, are you not from the everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have appointed them for judgment. O rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of pure eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. So this is what he's saying. God, you're holy, and look at the wickedness on this earth. How can you see this and let it go? How can you see evil prevail? How can you see these broken things and how they sit and how they rest? How can you see the state of your people and not engage? And so first question he asked him was, God, do you not hear me? And then now he's asking him, God, do you not see me? Do you not see what's going on in the world around you? He says, you look on those who deal treacherously and you hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he. Says the wicked are winning over the righteous. God, do you hear me? God, do you see me? But twice he asked the question, why? I think this probably might be one of the most popular prayers ever brought to God. It is not God, will you, but it's God, why are you? Or why aren't you? It's an authentic prayer. It's a prayer that many of us have probably brought at different times in our life. It's a prayer that reveals a state of need, that reveals a state of brokenness, it reveals a state of humility. It's like, God, why? Why is this happening? Why to me? Why in this surrounding? Why in my family? But I think what this does, beyond just showing us the state of Habakkuk, what it starts to show us is that God is actually able to handle our whys. He's able to handle our questions. God is able to handle our sorrows. God is able to handle our frustrations. He's able to handle our heartache. He's able to handle our tears. He's able to handle when we cry out to him. And in fact, I believe that God, in this, just on the beginning of this conversation, Habakkuk is showing how we can approach God. And he's showing that we can approach God with authenticity. We can approach God in a real way. And so in this book, we're going to see how to go from this question of why, to, I believe, at the end of this, we're going to see in Habakkuk chapter 3, we're going to see how to be a person of faith and trust, and actually how to have joy in the midst of these trials. Are you ready? You ready? You ready to learn some good stuff? This is enough negative stuff. Are we ready to get some good stuff now? How many of you could maybe identify with it? Things aren't going how I thought they should go. Things are not how, like, let's just be honest. How many in your life would say, maybe some things in my life I think could be going a little bit better? Anyone would be willing to say that today? I think there could be an adjustment. Some things could get better. Maybe you've cried out to God and said, God, why? Or do you hear me? So today I'm going to help you. And so here's our thing. I'm going to try to help us to go from questioning God to praising God. And this is what happens in Habakkuk's life. And this is the first thing we see is that Habakkuk is real with God in prayer. He's real with God in prayer. So if prayer is just a conversation between you and God, I think the problem for so many of us is that we try to come to God and impress him. I think about my 5-year-old son, Abel. He loves to put on costumes. One of his favorite costumes right now to put on is Sonic the Hedgehog. And he puts on his Sonic costume, his blue costume, and he runs to the house and he yells, Dad, can you see streaks behind me? Can you see lines behind me? He wants to know if he's running fast enough like Sonic that there's blue lines. And it's funny, I'll tell him, yeah, dude, you're so fast. Do it again. And it's funny, while he's running, he's like trying to look and see, like, are they there? Is Dad telling me the truth? And he asked me, he came the other day and he put that on and he says, he put it on, he ran around the house, do you see the lines? And he said, Dad, do I look cool? And I thought it was a great question. I was like, yes, you look cool. You look awesome, man. So he goes, he changed to a Paw Patrol costume, comes in, Dad will look cool. Yeah, you look cool. He came, put on a Transformer, Dad will look cool. And all of a sudden there was a conglomerate of all three. He came out, it was like a Transformer Bumblebee mask with a Sonic the Hedgehog. And he was like, Dad, yes, you look cool. And I think this is it's so funny. He's seeking affirmation. He was seeking, Dad, do you want to hang out with me? Dad, do you see me? Dad, do you notice me? Dad, do you love me? Dad, do you hear me? And I think this is sometimes how we try to impress God. We don't feel like we can approach God until we have the right stuff on. We think, like, if God is going to listen to my prayers, I better look the right way. I better put on my costume. I better in fact, some of us are like, I can't really lift a prayer. You maybe never said this, but you felt it. I don't really feel like I can pray until I read the word. I don't really feel like I can pray till I come to church. Like, I've been so far and so distant from God that I can't approach him until I get my costume on. And just like when Abel ran into my room and says, Dad, am I cool? Whether or not he had his costume on, you know what my answer is? You're a cool dude. I love you, man. Let's hang out. And I think God is the same way. Whether or not you've put on all the right things and whether or not you've done everything right, I think anytime you approach him, Anytime you come to talk to him, anytime you come to church, anytime you step in his presence, anytime you're in a shower and you just start to cry out, God, I don't understand. God, why? I think he's happy to hear from you. I think he's happy to talk to you. And this is the kind of God that we have. And I love that Habakkuk shows us we can be real with our prayers. We can be authentic with our prayers. We don't have to put on a suit to impress. We can show up how we are, and God will talk to us. But Habakkuk has some real problems. These aren't surface level. It's not just some little thing. It's not just a little thing at work or not just a little insecure thing. Like, he's got some real, like, world-type problems. And this is what he's starting to see. He sees that as he's talking to God, that God wants to rectify the unrighteousness of Israel. This is what Habakkuk asks. God, would you do something about the nation that you love? The wickedness that's in the nation, in your people, God, would you do something? And as God's having this conversation with Habakkuk, God starts to reveal, yes, I'm going to do something about it, but the way he's going to do it, he goes, I'm going to send the hand of the Babylonians. And so this is where you start to see where he's like, the people you're sending, they're treacherous. Evil are overcoming the righteous. And he's saying, God, what I ask you to do, on one hand, you're doing it. I've asked you to come and to rid the unrighteousness and the evil in Israel. So what I've asked you to do, you're doing it. But on the other hand, you're not doing it how I want you to do it. And he finds himself in this perplexing situation of what I've asked God to do, he's doing, but he's not doing it how I asked them to do it, how I hoped that he would do it, how I thought he should do it. And I got to tell you, right there in that moment, in that crux, in that perplexing situation between those two statements, I find myself often. I ask God to do something. God, would you move? God, would you do this? God, would you do that? And then as he starts to unroll it and unveil it to my eyes, I'm like, that's not what I asked for. That's not how I asked for it. In fact, I oftentimes put together really good plans. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a strategic thinker. I am a critical thinker. And oftentimes I put together these very thought out plans. I'll have multiple conversations with the staff and multiple conversations with my wife to the point where she starts nodding her head and she's not even agreeing or disagreeing. She's just like, I'm done talking about this. But I've thought through it. I've worked on it. I put it together and I present it to God. God, here's how this can work. And God goes, okay, I hear your prayer, but I'm not going to do it any way you thought I'd do it. And you know what? That's a hard place to be. Because now, I know he's heard my prayer. I've cried out to him. I've been authentic to him. But now he's not doing it how I thought he should do it. And this is where Habakkuk finds himself. And I think this is the second place for us to find ourselves. Is that first we got to be real with God in prayer. The next thing we got to do is release control. We've got to release the control of our lives. We've got to either say, you're God and I trust you, or I'm God and I trust me. And we find ourselves in that situation, and this is where Habakkuk finds himself. In fact, Sean, would you come up here just real quick? Jump up here, man. I want to show him something, just a little illustration. When we think about control, the first thing I think of is a fist. Make a tight fist for me. And so when you're in control of something, you've got it. You've got the reins of it. You're in control of it, over it. If you were, in a car, they tell you both hands on with your fingers wrapped around it. When you're lifting weights, one of the things Ryan always tells me is wrap your thumb, have control of the weights. Don't kick it out. There's a control is a fist. When I have control over something, I'm holding it and clenching it. It's tight. And here's the problem when we have control over our own lives. When we think, this is my life, this is my plan, God, would you do it how I think you should? The problem is when God comes in and wants to do something, God, I need you, but when he comes in and tries to do something, there's no room for him to do anything. We're holding it so tight that he can't get in here. And we're saying, God, I need you, but really what we're saying is, God, would you just do it how I want you to do it? We're almost shaking a fist at God and saying, God, this is what I want from you. And if he were to respond to us in that way, would he actually be God? If we could shake our fist at the heavens and God would respond and do what we want him to do, that makes him the genie in the lamp of Aladdin, right? That's a Robin Williams. That's not what we're asking. We actually need a miracle. And so when I need a miracle, this is what I have to do. I have to be someone who says, God, this is where I'm at. God, this is what's going on in my lives. And God, I'm trusting that you can do more with my open hand than I can do with my closed hand. God, if I want you to move in a mighty way, then I've got to release the control of my life. But if I'm asking God to move in a small, specific way, then really what I'm asking is, God, would you just be my beck and call? God, I want to put a couple quarters in the machine, and I want you to give me what I'm asking for. And Habakkuk found himself in this place when we're right here, all of a sudden the possibilities become limitless. Now, all of a sudden, what can God do? Where can he come at it? From what direction can he move and can he operate? And I believe this is the way many of us need to start approaching God. Thank you, Sean. Give my friend Sean a hand. So whatever your hand is holding on to tightly has little room for God to work in mightily. Whatever your hand is holding on to tightly has very little room for God to work in mightily. I love how the prophet Isaiah puts it. He says, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, and he's talking about God here, this is the word of the Lord, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. So we got to release control. We've got to trust the Lord. And then Habakkuk 2. Okay, keep going into this story. So then after this conversation back and forth, these prayers between God and Habakkuk resolves and he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand my watch. That's what he says. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait on the Lord. And I'm going to set myself on the rampart. The rampart is like the corner of a wall. It's the tower that overlooks where you could see an enemy coming from a distance. So he says, I'm going to wait and I'm going to set myself in the tower and I'm going to watch to see what he will say to me that's open-handed. Now I'm like, God, I trust you. God, I'm waiting for you. I need a word from you. I need help from you. And what I will answer when I'm corrected. So Habakkuk's saying there may be some correction that even needs to happen in my approach, in my thoughts of how I thought this was going to happen. And there's a submission to this. There's a surrender to this. But he says this, I'm going to stand my watch and set myself on the rampart. So here's the third thing we've got to do. We've got to wait with perspective. Wait with perspective. Waiting, I believe, is a sign of trust. Anytime you wait on something or you wait on someone, you're trusting that they're going to show up. You're trusting that you're gonna be there. I don't know if you've ever been waiting on someone that was running behind. You're looking at your watch, but the fact that you're still sitting there means you trust that they're going to show up. And so we wait on the Lord. What we're saying is, God, I trust that you're going to come. I trust that you're going to do what you said you're going to do. And I don't know if any of you guys are Lord of the Rings fans, but I love this conversation between Gandalf and Frodo. It's one of my favorite quotes from all three of the movies. Frodo says this, I wish it need not have happened in my time. I wish what's going on, I didn't have to be a part of. Like, this is hard, is what he's saying. And then Gandalf says, so do I, and so do all who live to see such times. Anyone who's going through what you're going through wishes they didn't have to go through it. That's essentially what Gandalf is saying. He goes, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. I love this quote because it gives a sense of purpose to waiting. It gives a sense of purpose to suffering. It gives a sense of purpose to lamenting. It gives a sense of purpose to things maybe not going how you thought they would go. Gandalf says you might not have control of the time and the situation, but the reality is you do have control of what you do in the time and the situation that you're in. And it's a great thought for us because I believe, well, this is what the Habakkuk, the prophet, is saying. He said, I'm gonna wait, but I'm gonna wait from the rampart. What's the rampart? It's the watchtower. It's an elevated perspective. And so he's not just waiting, but he's waiting with perspective. He's not just waiting lazily. He's waiting idly. He's waiting with expectation. He's waiting looking. He's waiting with perspective. He's looking out from the tower. And so when we wait, we want to wait with perspective. And what do I mean by that? The word perspective, a couple of different definitions of it, but I want to take it from like an artist approach today. And the word perspective, when you're drawing or doodling or painting, whatever you're doing with art, this is what it means. It means the art of drawing something to give the right impression of height, width, depth, and position in relation to a particular point. So if you're drawing it, you want to draw it in an accurate depth, an accurate height, so drawing with perspective means you're giving it an accurate point of view. But so many of us, I believe, when we wait, we're not waiting with perspective. We're waiting with what I would call, and what it's called in the art world, is forced perspective. Forced perspective. So I'm going to give you an example for this. So everyone just take up a hand, doesn't matter right or left. Take up a hand, hold it up in the air like this. Everyone in the room, come on. No one sit out. Come on, everyone jump in. All right. So have you ever looked up at the sun and done this? Squint an eye and been like, I'm holding the sun. Just do that right now. Take your two fingers. Show me how tall I am. Just look at me through your light, like how tall I'm about an inch and a half 2 inches tall. To Zach, I'm like 3 inches tall. But way back there in the back, I'm getting really, really small. That's called forced perspective. In fact, some of you have probably done that with the sun before, right? Have you ever done that? Have you ever seen the pictures of the Eiffel Tower where people like put their finger on top of the Eiffel Tower and it looks like they're bigger than the Eiffel Tower? That's called forced perspective. It's giving myself a perspective that's not accurate. It's looking at something through the wrong lens or the wrong way. And the problem with this idea of forced perspective is that we start to think that things are actually bigger or smaller than what they actually are. In this hand, all of a sudden, that person is like the hand of God. And they're looking at the sun, which is quite a bit larger than the earth. And it's quite a bit hotter than what the earth, in fact, I've seen some studies that say if the sun just moved a couple of miles closer to the earth, we'd just all be cooked like a fried egg on the surface of it. And so the sun is powerful, but it's amazing when I stand there and I look at it like this, all of a sudden I think I'm the big one. That what's going on in my world is important. What's going on in my world affects the sun. What's going on in my world is the most powerful thing that's going on. And I think for some of us, that's kind of how we do our faith. When we think and we pray to God, we're looking at God up like this. God, I hope you can, but I'm not sure you can. We have a forced perspective of God. When I love what the prophet Habakkuk says, he goes to the tower, and what he does is he recognizes the kingdom I'm in and the kingdom I'm standing on, the situation I'm in, the people group I'm speaking on behalf of, we're small. But when he looks out across the landscape of the earth, he starts to realize my God is big. And when we have the right perspective, all of a sudden our problems get smaller and our God gets bigger. Because we start to look at, man, if God has split the Red Seas, can he handle what I'm walking through today? If God has saved Abraham's son by miraculously putting a ram in a thicket, can he save something for me? Can he save my son that I'm praying for? If God can raise his son from the dead, if Jesus can raise from the dead, if he can raise Lazarus from the dead, if he can raise the widow's son from the dead, if he can raise the little girl from the dead, can he raise something from the dead in my life? A dream, a desire, a heart, a job? Like, is there these things? And all of a sudden, when we have the right perspective, we start to see how big our God is and how small our problem is. And this is what Habakkuk is saying. I got to get to the tower. Amen. Thank you, sir. I got to get to the tower. I got to wait with the right perspective. I'm not waiting and my God is getting smaller. While I'm waiting, my God is getting bigger. I'm reminding myself how big he is, how great he is, how incredible he is. Do you have the right impression of God as it pertains to your point of view? That's perspective. As it pertains to my situation, as it pertains to my situation and my season of life, do I have the right perspective of God? How do we gain perspective? By looking. We gain perspective by looking and looking the right way, looking at the right things. And I'll tell you this, if you want to have the right perspective of God, you have to know who he is. If you want to have the right perspective of God, go and read the book of Exodus and see how God delivered a people group miraculously through 10 plagues. And then he split the Red Sea, and then he fed them miraculously as they wandered in the desert. He gave them water when they didn't know where it was going to come from. He gave them food from the heavens. He split the Jordan River so they could walk into the promised land. And then he caused the walls of a mighty city to fall so they could take over what God had promised them. If you want to see how powerful your God is, start in Exodus. You'll start to see that God is powerful. Now I'm looking through the right perspective. This is the God that I serve. And so if you want to have the right perspective, you got to look in the right places. And we start to ask ourselves, has God ever done something like this before? I'm looking at my own life, my own situation. Has God ever done something like this before? How did he do it? Has God ever done something bigger than this before? How did he do it? And then when I start to read God's word, I start to realize that my problems are pretty small compared to my God. And this is how good God is. And so Habakkuk, he keeps going. In Habakkuk chapter 2, the next few verses, he says, then the Lord answered me. So he's looking, he's waiting, and God speaks to him. He says, write the vision and make it plain on the tablets that he may run who reads it. Write the vision and make it plain on the tablets. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak. So the vision is coming. It's not yet here. Write it down. It's coming. And it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. And here's the fourth thing for us today. I believe that we got to do to go from questioning God to praising God is we got to write down our vision, write down our dream. If you've ever been in my office, you get a really quick sense that I'm a whiteboard guy. Everything I do is visual. It has to be visual. In fact, I've got 4 whiteboards hanging on a wall. I've got a mobile whiteboard. I've got a whiteboard back here in a little prayer room. And oftentimes, all of those are in my office. You can't even see a wall because there's whiteboards everywhere. And people are like, where's that at? And it's like, hold on, I got to go to my office and take a picture of the whiteboard and text it to you because I'm a visual guy. Like, things have to get up for me to consume them. They have to get up for me to remind myself of them. I'm very visual. Post-it notes everywhere, whiteboards everywhere. Nothing sticks for me unless it's written down big and I can see it often. Here's what happens. Something happens, I believe, when you write things down. It's like an idea all of a sudden takes on a materialistic form. What was a possibility now becomes a plan. What was a possibility now has potential. And I believe that too many dreams have died in people's hearts and minds because they never got written down. They're things that we intended on doing, things that we hoped to accomplish, things that we dreamed about, we thought about, we might have even talked about, but we never put them down. And here's why we write them down. You're like, John, is this just like a leadership thing? Is this like just you've maybe been to a leadership seminar and they talk about some things like this, but I want to show you this. I believe a vision only becomes valid when it's written down. It only becomes valid when it's written down. So the question for us, I might ask you today is, do you have a vision for your business? Maybe some of you are thinking about your business, like what you do for a living. And the way to measure that is, do I have a vision for my business? The way to measure it is it written down? Do I have a vision for my marriage? What I hope my marriage, not just what I intend or think or dream it could be, but do I have a vision for it? And the question for that is it written down? Do I have a vision for my kids? Do I have a vision for my family? The question for that is it written down? Do I have a vision for my purpose, my ministry, like what God has called me to? Is it written down? And why is it writing it down important? Like, what's the magic behind writing something down? I'll tell you this. It serves as a physical reminder. When I write something down, I can go back and look at it, and I can go back and look, and I can see what God has done. And this is something that's been going on since the Old Testament. I told you about how God rescued the people of Egypt, or rescued the people out of Egypt, the Israelites out of Egypt. They wandered for 40 years. They crossed the Jordan River into the promised land of God. And the first thing Joshua says, he says, gather some stones from that river and stack them up. And why do you say stack them up? He goes, I want to stack these up, make an altar, so that every time someone walks by here, they'll remember and they'll see the faithfulness of God. Generations later, in fact, in Israel today, you can go, and hopefully we're going to go in the next year or so, but you can go, and when you walk through Israel, you can see stacks of stones that have been standing for thousands of years that serves as reminders of the faithfulness of God. And when we write down a vision, what it does is, it's no magic in the pen, but what it does is it puts things in writing that I can go back and look at. And then when God does it in my life, I can see, look what God did. But here's what happens when we don't write it down. God does something, and somehow, some way, we take the credit. But when I write it down, I realize, I remember that was a cry. I remember that I cried out in desperation, God, how would you do this? God, can you do this? God, would you do this for my wife? God, would you do this for my kids? God, would you do this for my business? I start to position myself as someone who needs the hand of God. Someone needs a miracle from God. And I start to realize that my best might not be good enough. I need His best. That my work might not be good enough. I might need a miracle from God. And so I write it down. I write it down plain. God, I need you to do this. I don't know how. I don't know when. But God, I'm believing you for this. This is the vision you've given me. This is what I believe for my family. This is what I believe for my marriage. This is what I believe for my church. This is what I believe for my business. And then when I come back to it, and I wait and I tarry, and I come back to it, not just for me, but for the generations to follow, they can see the hand of God has been moving in my life. That God has answered my prayers. That God is moving like He was, and He's still moving today. So I write it down. I stack the rocks. And I say, God, I remember what you've done. And I want the next few generations of people to continue to remember and see what you're doing. Habakkuk chapter 3, in closing, says this, verse 17 and 19. This is his song. So he's had a prayer in chapter 1. In chapter 2, there's a conversation that turns to some woes. looking at the enemy and looking at the state of Israel and the state of Babylon. And then in chapter 3, he lifts up a song. It changes tones. And this is the song he sings. He says, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fell, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut out from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. What's he saying? Everything's going wrong. Nothing's going right. God, I've been praying, I've been crying out to you, and I can look in all of these things. Nothing is working right. Nothing is going good. But I love how he turns the page right here. He says, there's no herd in the stalls yet. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Even when God doesn't do what I think he should do. Even when he doesn't do it how I think he should do it. Even when he does it when I think he should do it. I will trust in the Lord. And Habakkuk comes to this realization. I've been crying out in desperation. I've been complaining. I've been frustrating. I've been authentic. And there's this whole process that he's going through. And at the very end of it, he goes, you know what? All of that is true. That was a real perspective from where I'm at, but now I recognize I have a proper perspective. I'm not looking at my problems as if they're bigger than God. I'm looking at my God as if he's bigger than my problems. And now he's going, all these things might not be going right, but God, I still trust you. I trust that you're still sovereign and that you sit on the throne. I trust that you're still just and that justice will rain down on this earth. I trust that you still love and that you still redeem and that you still forgive. And so God, I believe in you and I trust in you. And he says, I'll take the joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on the high places. And so Habakkuk is realizing, like, although everything down here is bad, when I'm with the Lord, I can have an elevated perspective. God lifts my perspective above my situation. And what's all of this happening? All this is happening in a song. And this is the last thing for us today. I believe that some of us need to sing some songs of faith. We need to sing some songs of faith. Even when we can't see him or his plan unfolding, he's still God. Even while we're waiting, we know he's working, he's still God. Even if it doesn't appear how or when or why we think it should, he's still God. Even if we have to wait a little longer, he's still God. And when we worship, when we don't feel like it, when we worship when things aren't good, when we worship even if or even instead or even while something bad is going on, that is when we make our strongest statements of faith. When I say, God, you are God in the middle of my situation. God, you are God in the middle of my torment. God, you are God in the middle of my lack. God, you are God in the middle of my why. But God, I trust you. That's when we sing our greatest songs of faith. You see, some of us think if I come in and I sing and I don't feel like it, I'm faking it. No, you're faithing it. It's what you're doing. I don't feel like it. God, I don't know how this is going to work out, but God, I'm going to lift my hands anyways. In fact, I do that about once a month. I come in here and I'm like, I'm tired. I don't feel like your pastor's confessing before you today. And I just say, God, it's not me. It's not my songs. It's not my church. God, you're just God. And I'm going to trust you and I'm going to worship you. And I just elevate. And you know what happens? This is how good God is. When I start to do that, he starts to encourage my soul. When I start to do that, it's what he says here in the song, he elevates my perspective. He pulls me out. Even though I'm in the middle of something, he gives me a different point of view. When I start to trust him. You see, faith is a response to the God I serve, not a response to the situation that I'm in. And Habakkuk goes from complaining to faith. And that faith always turns to a song. When we have faith, when we have trust in God, it's not just something we know or believe, it's something we confess with our mouths. And I love how Habakkuk, he ends that way. He says, hey, I'm going to sing these songs. I'm going to rejoice even still, even yet. I trust the Lord. And so today, this is what I want us to do. All across the room, would you stand up all across the room? And I'm asked Taylor to come up here. And we're just going to do this. If some of you are, maybe a lot of us here today are going through something. Maybe you've got some whys. Maybe you've got some questions for God. Maybe you're like me and you've presented God a good plan and he's not doing it how you thought or when you thought. And you find yourself in a situation where you need the hand of God to do something in your life. This is what I want to encourage you to do, is to move from complaining to move from just asking to move to faith, to shift your posture from God, why, and I love how Habakkuk shifts his posture from God, why, to even if you don't, I'm still going to praise you. And here's what I love about Habakkuk, is Habakkuk never gets to see these prophecies fulfilled. He worships and he waits and he never sees it. It comes to the next generation. What kind of faith does it take to worship God even if he doesn't do what you ask him to do? Do you have that kind of faith? Do you believe in him enough? Is he that good? Is he good enough and what he did on the cross good enough for you to say, even if you never do another thing for me, that was enough? God, even if there's another miracle that you don't perform in my life, what you did for me on the cross, Jesus, that's enough. God, even if you don't do this, how I hoped you would do it, God, that's enough. You're faithful, you're just, and I love you, and I trust you. And God, I release control, and I open up my hands, and I cry out to you, God, and I say, I need you, Lord. And so today, if that's you, just all across this room, would you just lift your hands right now? If that's you, say, God, I need you to move. God, we're just coming before you right now as your people. And God, we're recognizing that you are God. God, we're recognizing that you are faithful, that you are powerful. God, shift our perspectives from ourselves on this earth to you and your heavens and your might and your power and your faith and your kindness. God, we trust you. And so right now in this moment, we cry out to you, God. We cry out to you, God. We need you, Lord.